Welcome back, my friends. It's episode 3 of Withe Stone Stories. Tales from Withe Stone. Tales of the Village. I've got to figure out what I'm going to call this. Either way, thanks for being here. Today we celebrate the turning of the season. And what better way to do it than take you on a little tour of the village today. Specifically, just outside the village. A little journey up the upper pastures and some of the surrounding countryside here at this turning time. Well, there is certainly no doubt summer has gone. Not on the calendar maybe, but the shift has come and we're all feeling it in our bones. So I'm spending the day sitting out here on the porch. You might be able to hear the waterfall behind me, behind the Three Sisters where I live. After the intense heat of early August, the shift came pretty quickly, and it seemed like a fine day to be outside rather than the way sitting inside. So pardon the background noise, but it's a beautiful day. Why waste it? Yes, this is the time of the year when we kind of shift from all the summer activities, the foods and smells and clothes, to those of autumn, even though it's still barely into September. But the air coming in through the windows at night is cool enough to warrant getting that favorite blanket from off the high shelf in the linen closet, the one that Jan crocheted in reds and golds and browns and muted greens with just a touch of sparkling white, like the first frost on a winter garden. Not seeing much color in the trees yet. It's far too early for that. But the hummingbirds seem to know what's coming. For a while they were completely ignoring the feeders, but then suddenly they're feeding voraciously to fuel up for their southern migration. Give it a few more days and they'll be gone. The sun is still warm, even hot to sit in, but the breezes have cooled and the shadows on the road outside our cottage are stretching longer. So I decided, after doing the morning chores today, that I would take a walk up to the high fields, which were somehow calling to me, and I chose not to resist. So I kicked my way down the dusty valley road, past the hedgerows, still the dark, dull green of late summer, but there were plenty of rustlings from within with birds and animals sampling the first ripening fruits. It won't be long till Miss Molly Berthold will be doing the same thing, collecting sloes and damsons, elderberries, rose hips and crab apples. She'll be filling the pots on her stove and stirring it a good amount of attentive love to make hedgerow jam amidst clouds of sweet exotic perfume of harvest. Molly has lived at her post at the corner of the green for as long as most people can remember. She was here when we arrived. She was most welcoming, and Jan would stop in for tea and conversation often. And there must be few houses in the village that do not have a jar or two of Molly's jam preserves in their larder. The hedgerows up the road from her house on her side are hers, and for common courtesy, everyone in town respects that, except for the birds and critters, but then they have license to raid. The ones on the other side are for anyone, but practically speaking, most folks in town are happy to let Molly doing the harvesting, as it means more jam for everyone. And after doing her magic, it goes into the little hutch on the edge of the corner, and everyone leaves a donation and takes what they will, as long as they return the crocks washed and dried in the box below. I don't recall ever hearing of anyone abusing this system, but I doubt that Molly would complain even if anyone did. Most folks in town consider her a treasure and would do anything for her. So, consequently, along about February, we'll all be sitting down by a fire in an ingle nook with a pot of tea, some fresh scones from the oven, maybe some clotted cream, and that dollop of summertime that holds back the dark days of winter. Thank you, Molly. Beyond the hedgerows lie little fields of grain, which the harvesting teams will soon be attending to, swinging their scythes. First comes the barley, that will start any day now, and very soon after the wheat will be harvested. Always that order. For now, however, the harvesters are silent, except for the voices of the wind blowing through the reeds and the occasional insect. The fields are quiet. Around the curve, my walk takes me to the old stone clapper bridge. This is one of my favorite spots on a hot summer day. Jan's as well, he would often come here during the summer. The air is much cooler with the currents from the cold water rushing beneath. It's dark and shady still, because the trees have not yet begun to change out of their summer wear and into their stained glass glow of autumn. The bridge itself looks like standing stones in recline, great flat stones resting on equally massive boulders for support. It's wide enough to drive a horse and wagon off, but with no sides, aim is critical, and consequently most people in wagons take other routes, and this is used primarily as a footbridge. All this mass of gray stone may partly be responsible for the temperatures here, and it's certainly to the energy. The flowing water and the ancient earth combined with this stone makes it a very mystical place indeed. It's also the favorite shelter for frogs, who sing their exuberant chorus every evening for passers-by, as long as the interlopers remain respectfully quiet. Otherwise, the insulted amphibians stop short, only to resume when the brazen attendee departs. The road forks on the far side of the bridge to either continue down the valley or climb to the ridge to the high fields. I took the latter into the woodlands, wound my way up the hill, up to a flat space about halfway up, which is the residence of Roger the Bodger. If the name is a coincidence, it's a fine one indeed. Roger does green work for the village. He also takes care of the woodlands. He and his massive Shire horse Abercrombie can sometimes be spotted hauling a freshly felled tree by chains out of the forest. He does not take felling trees lightly and is quite selective when he does. He loves these woods and spends as much time caring for them as those who live in them. He keeps me supplied with wood for musical instruments, and I know the spirit of the wood I use is handled with honor and respect. He's a big burly man, yet quiet and even-tempered. He spends most of his days under the awning he's built amongst the trees, turning greenwood on a sapling lever lathe. Draw knife, drill, and fresh oak combine to make chairs and tables that will last a lifetime and then some, all with no glue or fasteners. True magic is this. Today Roger was tending fire in his steam bending box when I came by. He stepped up with a big hand extended, an equally big smile of white teeth set in bushy sandy beard, and he asked to my health and how the grandkids were getting along. Last summer he kindly spent a day with them, teaching them to make a few small kitchen utensils that they got to take home with them. Then he showed me a fine bent-back chair he was working on as a joint commission with our local basket maker / chair caner. He spoke of how he loved collaboration and the symbiosis of creativity with all the locals. It's more than a creative process, it's a socialization as well, and he appreciated the opportunities to be that. Finally, with a shake of my hand and a big hug to the memory of Jan, as he said, and I was off again to the top. By late morning, the woodlands were quiet. The morning songbirds were now off doing whatever it was they did between concerts. Sunshine through the branches dappled little shafts of light onto the ferns and the brush of the undergrowth that in springtime was carpeted with bluebells. A few squirrels were bouncing their way around the forest floor, sniffing at the air as they waited for the acorns to finish baking, so to speak. Soon they'll be zigzagging everywhere, tails twitching, branch leaping, chittering incessantly with excitement, hopefulness, or crankiness, or, well, for no other reason than to hear their own voice. That's squirrels for you. At last I crested the ridge to the edge of the woods. All along the stone fence, out of reach of the hungry sheep, the tall grasses waved a cheery hello, dotted with cowslips and heather, Queen Anne's lace, and the occasional pokeberry, which made a colorful frame around this close-cropped field within. Passing through the stile gate to the undulating pasture within, I've got to stand and look at the variety of sheep in this communal field. They're dotted about like little fluffy families. Over in one corner, a big Wensleydales, whose coats hang down to cover their feet, kind of moved about like shaggy ghosts. Farther on a high spot, playing king of the mountain, stood a flock of Manx Lothrians, with heads full of as many as 3 sets of horns each. A very frightening-looking sheep, and no sane person would challenge them. And on the move, across the nearest side of the field, were 20 or so tiny soys. They're ancient descendants of Norse sheep from the Hebrides. They were happily stopping to eat anything that the other sheep ignored. I'm sure there's a lesson in there for all of us, somewhere. Most of the sheep are kept for wool, and the variety of breeds in this and the other fields in the area make a lot of blending possibilities. Textiles are a big part of the local industry, all coming from the crofters' cottages, the wool coming from these fields. A lot of wool swapping takes place amongst the artisans, along with flax and cotton, and many cottages in the area have spinning wheels, weasels, and looms in their parlors. Other trades have sprung up because of this as well, like frog and button making, with woven buttons from the hills and mother-of-pearl ones from down by the seaside makers. Up here, Rosemary York is famous for her yarns. Her husband Thomas is the shepherd who watches this communal field and its inhabitants as part of his duties. The two of them live in a lovely stone cottage tucked into the woodland hills. Rosemary definitely has a way with colors, and is the most knowledgeable person in these parts in the arts and dyes which are used for witch wool. She is an alchemist indeed. She scours the fields and forests for her regents, like woad and sumac, yarrow, madder, bladderroot, pokeweed, and she mixes them with alloys of tin and iron and alum, and elderberries and cherries and marigolds and onions, things I would never imagine using for dyes. Then she blends the different wools and does her magic. These special prize rovings then travel for miles to become thread and yarn and felt that in turn gets woven into patterns of cloth and knitwear that adorns all of our homes. It's part of that wonderful symbiosis that Roger spoke of, the symbiosis of community. Why, the socks on my feet right now started out in this very field I'm walking across. Her husband Thomas is a wizard in his own right, but with a much different focus. You see, the other thing these sheep and the goats elsewhere up here are used for is milking, and it's Thomas who sees to that. And yes, to answer the obvious question, some of these sheep and goats are used for consumption. They will go to the butchers after a side trip to the abattoir, but that's really not where we're headed in our narrative today. I will, however, point out that the truly kind folks who handle this chore for the community honor each life passed on to them, and see to each animal's end quickly and as gently as possible. As a community, we honor all of nature, including our own, and we accept the roles that we must fill as we journey around the path. Thomas, however, has a very pleasant chore of taking all that milk, well, most of it anyway, to the low stone barns at the edge of the field, where rennets, bacteria, cultures, and experience, and time combine into the magic that is cheese. You may catch my bias here, but I've never met a cheese that didn't become my new best friend. And as such, the cheese houses are the friendliest places in town for me. Wensleydale's, Butterklaus, Triple Cream Breeze, Variety of Blues, all come from the village dairies, then go back to them, transformed into a variety of culinary experiences. Hands-on favorite in town are the Cheddars. There's a flight of stone stairs behind the cheese barns that leads into a cleft in the limestone bluffs just over the rise, and down into the caves, where rack upon rack of golden goodness pass the time before headed to the cheese shop on the green. Thomas was not cheese making today, obvious for two reasons: no smoke in the barns, chimneys, and more so, the drifting sound on the breeze of bagpipes. He's fond of perching on a rock and playing for his sheep. I have little doubt this has a great deal to do with the taste of the cheese as a finished product. Well, maybe that's just in my head, but I'm going with that story. The pipes are still a pleasant experience here. To hear that slow, haunting drone echo across the hills is to hear the ancient spirit of these moors calling to the valleys below. And it always made Jan and I feel like we wanted to take a deep breath and feel the expansiveness of the experience. I smell the sweet grass still in my head as I made my way back down the back trail that winds down the hill and comes out behind the mill pond. Years of training by Jan's artist eye made me keen to pick out the tiny white and purple flowers growing along the banks and the reflection of the clouds gathering above. Rain is coming onto the wind. It's a ways off yet, so it seems. Since I am passing the mill, I went down the street just a little farther and stopped off at the butcher's for some ham, some cheese, since it put me in mind of that fine cheddar, and some fresh onions from the greengrocer. Then I skirted along the north edge of the green and back to the path that led here. Right here, to this little porch, to my patio, where I get to talk to you, one of my favorite pastimes. I thank you for listening. So now I believe I'll take my ham, my cheese, my onions, go in and make a nice little casserole, all layered up together with some nice seasoned breadcrumbs on top. Then I'll sit down next to the fire with a good book for a while. And as the light fades, then I'll go snuggle down under that favorite blanket and let the wind blow across the open window until the rain begins to fall.